Captain Kirk.
Fascinating.
I'm a doctor, not a mechanic.
Thank you, love you. Mwah.
Most illogical.
Aye, sir.
Well, that was different. Yep, lousy, but different.
Places, please, and here we go.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, betazoids, chickens, and things, to episode 91 of the MuppeTrek Podcast. I'm Steve.
And I'm Jarman, and we're here to compare, contrast, and confer about our two favorite franchises. And what the hell are those, Steve?
That's the Muppets and Star Trek. We've been doing one-to-one reviews of the Muppet Show and Star Trek the Animated Series.
And tonight we're covering the Muppet Show, a special guest star Christopher Reeve, and Star Trek Animated Series episode, The Terratin Incident. Before we get into that weird-sounding episode, who the hell is this Christopher Reeve guy, Steve?
Well, Christopher Reeve was an American actor who is most known for playing Superman in the highly successful films of the late 70s and early 80s. Unfortunately, in 1995, during a horse riding incident, he broke his neck, and he ended up as a quadriplegic. While he did have a few minor appearances after that point, they were far and few. One of the more notable of which was a 2-episode arc on the Superman-inspired television show Smallville. He passed away in 2004. What does our audience know him from? Well, if Michael Keaton is Batman, Christopher Reeve is Superman.
Of that generation, for sure.
Like, in my mind, he is still the definitive Superman.
His face does come up in my head when I think Superman, because for
right,
years,
exactly.
he was it. Like, Dean Cain was a shy imitation.
Name one other Superman that has had 3.5 successful films.
It's true. I also remember him from my childhood. My mom was obsessed with a movie called Somewhere in Time, which I think was based off a book. But
okay.
Basically, it's where he sees a picture of a woman, Christopher Reeve's character, from back in like the 1800s, but he finds out this way to time travel by going to this closet and going back to the 1800s to find her so that he can fall in love. It was interesting, but it was super romantic and cheesy.
If anything was going to make man invent time travel, it was to go back in time and hook up.
Absolutely. But it's a good flick, so people should check it out.
What's he up to this week on the Muppet Show? Well, the backstage plot is basically all about how Piggy is just obsessed with Christopher Reeve. Kermit is thrown to the wayside. Later, it's revealed that she's got like a Reeve shrine in her dressing room with Superman's. And she does eventually go after Christopher in his own dressing room. And he tries to assure her that he isn't Superman, but then he just breaks everything with seeming super strength. Kermit does ask Christopher Reeve to play Hamlet. He hops into a conveniently placed phone booth and instantly costume changes. Sam is later outraged by the show, just in general. Floyd Pepper begins to play Sam's song. He is joined by Janice and a bevy of backstage characters, including the bandleader Nigel, who whistles extraordinarily in one of those sweet, rare backstage musical numbers. On stage this week, Kermit introduces Christopher Reeve, but first we get some frogs in the swamp. Kermit joins them for Disco Frog. It's an upbeat number as the frogs are tormented by an alligator and Kermit disco dances. Gonzo pokes his head out to look for Kermit. He can't go on because he sprained his nose, so he can't do Hamlet. Kermit tells the audience filling in will be Christopher Reeve. Christopher Reeve starts the soliloquy from Hamlet. Fozzie tries to help him with his lines. Beauregard brings out a skull for the Alas Poor Yorick speech, which is done by a different character in a different part of the show.
Yeah.
The skull begins to sass Christopher, and the whole thing devolves. Link Hogthrob gets involved, and then we get into the musical number, Brush Up Your Shakespeare. Up next, we get a Muppet News flash. A dangerous sheep has escaped, and it attacks the newsman. Following this, we get Veterinarian's Hospital, where Dr. Bob is on the table. Christopher is the doctor this week, and Piggy flirts shamelessly. Reeves really hams it up.
Yes.
Fozzie then takes to the piano, oddly enough. He performs the Toreador song. You'll recognize it when you hear it. He's joined by a matador until a bull stampedes them off. We take a quick visit to Muppet Labs. They bring in a cow to test the heated milk machine. It ends up attached to Beaker's head. It blows up, but he ends up with some beautiful curls. Kermit introduces Miss Piggy, who performs Never Before, Never Begin, or at least she begins to. Made famous in the Muppet movie, she crushes Rolf's hand by accident, and Christopher has to come and play the piano for her. He does another phone booth change into a tux, and he hits the stage. The song changes from East of the Sun and West of the Moon, with Piggy still swooning over Christopher Reeve. Piggy thinks he's going to fly her away, but she's just a little too heavy. Kermit thanks Christopher Reeve one last time. Christopher makes one more fat joke about Miss Piggy. She comes up to chop him and hurts her hand because he is the Man of Steel. And that is what we call the Muppet Show.
Damn right.
So, Jarm, what did you think of this week's episode with Christopher Reeve?
I think he was just absolutely charming and sweet, and seems like even though he's like 6'4", I think he just seems like a little teddy bear, you know, like he just seemed like he loved being there with the Muppets. He seemed very happy, a little awkward at times, but that kind of added to his charm a bit. And they really played to his strengths, like he's an actor but he can sing a little. He's not a great singer, but he can sing. He can stay on key, and it was a cute little performances he did. Brush Up Your Shakespeare and the Miss Piggy number, like you said. And doing some hammy Shakespeare, and sometimes he went a little too over the top with the weird faces he made in Veterinarian's Hospital. Like I was like, what is he doing? He's like acting like a Muppet, I guess, but it was strange.
Yeah, his hamming it up laugh face where he like turned away from the camera and goes,
yeah,
kind of like pants like a dog, was like, okay, that's a Muppety thing.
It was Muppety, I guess. It was a little strange, but it was interesting. But I love the Superman movie growing up, all of his movies, and so I like seeing him doing the Superman jokes and stuff and breaking things, but also I love Professor Honeydew falling in love with Beaker once his hair changes.
That was great.
He's like, you look so beautiful.
Yeah, he like caresses him, puts his arm around him.
It was
like,
interesting.
All right. Maybe Beaker's a girl. Maybe this whole time.
We've never known this whole time. Or they're just
never known.
Two boys that have, bunked together, who knows?
I guess. But I mean, I think either way, it's a big win for equality.
Absolutely.
Because that's either, a gay couple on television or another women in the sciences.
Absolutely. More women in STEM. Come on, let's do it.
Win-win.
But yeah, plenty of other good sketches and musical numbers. Like I love the Disco Frog. That was a great number. And so, yeah, this is definitely one of the better episodes of the season for me so far. I don't know about you. What'd you think?
I've got to agree. Christopher Reeve was a good host. He did a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Which was good in that, like, he didn't just, we've seen a lot of celebrities, I feel like this season specifically, who just do their shtick.
And they don't even change costume once, and he changed like 14 times.
So yeah, he like admits he's Superman. He plays up to that. They get that out of the way. But then you're right. He gets to sing. He gets to play the piano. He gets to ham it up in a comedy sketch.
Yeah.
He really gets to stretch and do a lot, and does a lot more than some other hosts. If anything, I feel like the Muppets fell a little short this week.
That's almost true.
Bunsen Honeydew, Muppet Labs was great, but like the news anchor was a little bit underwhelming. I wish Brush Up Your Shakespeare could have been a little bit bigger in some way, and I'm not even sure how. Even the backstage Sam the Eagle number, Sam's song just felt weird and kind of underwhelming. I
could see that. I guess they threw all their eggs in the Disco Frog basket.
Yes, they definitely did. So I think great host, really stretched, got to show a lot, really clearly had fun with the Muppets, connected well with the Muppets. Mm-hmm. If anything, maybe the Muppets were a little low energy for Christopher Reeve.
That's true. They didn't match his energy this time.
Maybe they were expecting a Florence Henderson and they got a Christopher Reeve,
You never want to make that mistake.
That's right. You never want to make a Florence Henderson.
Never go full Florence Henderson.
Never go full Florence Henderson.
Oh, man.
So music this week, boy howdy. Disco Frog. This is written by Joe Raposo, longtime Muppet collaborator, and he's the writer of C is for Cookie and the Sesame Street theme.
Nice.
Brush Up Your Shakespeare. This is from the musical Kiss Me Kate, written by Cole Porter. While Cole Porter did have many Broadway successes, Kiss Me Kate is the only musical that ran for 1,000 shows on Broadway.
Wow.
Sam's song, written by, that can't be right, Steve, Quadling and Elliot. There's no way. I'm just going to go with it because I don't want to look it up. Quadling and Elliot. John Elliott, Walt Disney's Toot, Whistle, Plunk, and Boom. He was the writer of the music for that, and it won the 1953 Oscar for Best Short Animated Feature. Toot, Whistle, Plunk, and Boom. The Toreador song, it's actually named is Votre Toast. Je peux vous le rendre. Yeah, right. From the musical Carmen, the French opera, Roger Hammerstein adapted this song as part of his Carmen adaptation, Carmen Jones, which I didn't even know that Hammerstein did a Carmen adaptation.
Neither did I.
And in that musical, the song was titled Stand Up and Fight. East of the Sun and West of the Moon, written by Bowman and a Princeton undergrad in 1934. This has become a signature song for the Princeton Tiger Tones, one of Princeton's premier and oldest enduring a cappella groups.
Nerds.
Yes, just a different kind of nerd.
It was a nice duet, though, Miss Piggy and Christopher Reeve, though. That was nice.
So, Jarman, what did you think was this week's best MuppeTrek moment?
I don't know how we say anything else besides Disco Frog, man. That was him jumping and dancing with people with the black screen in the back. You kind of see them in the background controlling Kermit, jumping on the lily pads. And like the meanwhile, there's real water somewhere in there and an alligator swimming around and tons of little frogs. It was just a lot going on. Huge set. I mean, it was impressive.
I don't know. For the first time ever, I'm kind of going to give like a negative MuppeTrek moment.
Ooh.
I thought Disco Frog was really distracting. Like the effect they used, when it looked good, it looked really good. But there were far too many times where I could see like full outlines of performers.
That's true. I kind of blame the
and
special
then on
effects
top of that,
for
the
that
visuals like clipping over top of each other as they were clearly matted in some way.
It's almost like I don't blame the Muppeteers for that, though.
Right. But it was one of those things where I was like, this was not successful.
That's true.
This is the biggest number, and this was not successful.
That's a
and
good
I
point.
Don't say that often.
Yeah.
Because you're right. When it looked good, it looked really, really good. But there were so many times I was like, oh my God, I can see all 4 performers right now.
That's not a good thing.
What is going on?
Oh, man.
So I guess best, worst MuppeTrek moment goes also to Disco Frog.
Oh, so you're giving it to both, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Like
I see.
Highs and lows all in one number.
Fair. Totally fair.
So, Jarman, what happened on this week's episode of Star Trek, the animated series?
We have the Terratin Incident.
Oh.
Now, the Enterprise is observing a burnt-out supernova when they hear a strange message being transmitted by a 200-year-old Earth code. So they trace the signal to a nearby planet that seems to be under volcanic distress of some sort. But just then they are hit by some kind of energy beam that destroys their dilithium crystals and causes the whole crew to shrink. Oh no.
Whoa.
Bones figures out that eventually that they will shrink so small that they won't be able to operate the ship anymore because they won't be strong enough to push the buttons and stuff, and they'll be marooned in this part of space. But before time runs out, Kirk decides to beam himself down to the volcanically erupting planet and finds that the transporter reverts him back to his original size. It has a memory of his pattern buffer and all that jazz. But on the planet, he finds what appears to be a miniature city. And he beams back to the ship because he was on a timer to beam back. And he finds now that the crew are already all too tiny to operate the ship, but also that the bridge crew specifically was beamed down by the miniature city down to their planet and their city. So Kirk makes contact with the leader of their tiny city and finds out that their city's called Terratin. It's a long-lost Earth colony that was actually called Terra-10. And the inhabitants of the colony mutated over time because of the nearby supernova of this planet. And they just adjusted to life as tiny people. But the people of the tiny city were desperate to get off this planet because it's just being destroyed right now by volcanic eruptions. But they couldn't communicate normally because of the size difference. So they used their shrink ray so they could have a dialogue with the Enterprise. And the leader of the Terratin colony apologizes to Kirk for causing the disturbance, and the crew are beamed back and to the regular size. But to save the Terratin people, Kirk has the whole miniature city itself beamed onto the Enterprise so they can move them to a new, safe planet. And everything turns out well in the end. So, Steve, what do you think of this episode?
All right, so some things I liked. This had a slower burn than some of the other episodes.
It did.
And I liked that.
Oh.
They actually receive the transmission. They decide to investigate. They go to a second location. And all these things are not really typical of animated series. Most of the time, animated series starts with like, we received a communication. They literally outline exactly what's happened. And they pull up to the second location.
Right.
Like as the episode starts. So this felt more like an original series episode in many ways. I love the idea of the shrinking crew. They didn't always keep the scale real consistently.
No.
Because there were times where they're clearly reusing cells. And so the size would switch occasionally, or they didn't implement the background correctly. But overall, I really liked the idea and the concept and the sort of struggles it created for the crew.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great original concept, at least for Star Trek. Dislikes. I didn't have any major issues with this episode.
Wow.
This might be my favorite one of the animated series so far.
Oh, wow. I'm impressed.
It's like Star Trek-y. There's investigation. The bad guy ends up not being a bad guy. They end up helping somebody. It's science-y at times.
There's
it
not
really has kind of all the hallmarks of a good episode.
There's no evil godlike space race again.
Right. Or you think there is, and they end up just being desperate people. Like, that was good.
Yeah.
So yeah, literally, I did not put anything under my dislikes column because
Impressive.
I really didn't have any major issues with this episode.
It's funny because the part that you liked, that there was felt like a slower burn, I feel like some parts of this dragged out a bit, and it felt like it moved a little slower than other episodes of the animated series we've watched, because they seem like to go so fast. But I did like that it was like a quintessential sci-fi type of story, shrinking to be able to communicate with another race or group of people because they can't understand you until you shrink too, and that's very sci-fi and that kind of thing. But one thing that stuck out to me was Nurse Chapel at one point gets shrunk down and falls into like a fish tank, and they just reuse her 2 lines of help, and she goes, help, 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 and they use the same over and over and over again. I'm like, she's not even like sounding that concerned, but it was a really bad line read, and they just had to repeat it over and over again because they only got her saying it twice, and it was so bad. That really stood out.
Some poor sound guy was like, this is going to be awful.
Just push the 2 buttons. Help, help, help,
Help,
help.
help, help.
So for me, it was actually kind of a middling episode. I thought the other ones were more interesting and more locales and things going on. But I like the fact that it's your favorite so far. That's great.
Yeah, truly. I don't, if you look at my notes on our shared thing, I have nothing under dislikes.
I like it. Very nice. Well, we got a little bit of trivia for this. There's always a little bit less of trivia for these animated series episodes, but the idea of some of the crew being miniaturized by a form of scientific phenomenon was used again later on in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, One Little Ship, which we'll eventually get to.
Ooh.
First appearance of sensitive animals, the semi-transparent gossamer mice and the brightly glowing halo fish that they kept in sickbay were used to monitor environmental changes, much like canaries used in coal mines back in the day. So that was the first time we've seen that on the Enterprise as being a regular thing that just pretending was always there. But we've never seen that before. The episode's writer, Paul Schneider, previously wrote 2 Star Trek original series episodes, Balance of Terror and The Squire of Gothos.
Squire of Gothos is a classic.
Exactly. Balance of Terror is really good too. That's the big Romulan one, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And according to Schneider, the Terratin Incident was based on a 1-paragraph story idea that Gene Roddenberry had. He says, I took it there with Dorothy Fontana, who was like DC Fontana, one of the big writers, and the show's associate producer. Both loved it. And he said, I love the concept of doing something related to Gulliver's Travels. He said, I enjoyed that as well as watching the process of animation develop. Overall, I thought the episode turned out rather well. I think he's correct. And does have he even says that Lilliputian people at the end of the episode.
Yeah, Lilliputian.
Lilliputian people. Yeah, exactly. So they really going heavy on that Gulliver's Travels thing. But Steve, what are our Trek Muppet connections this time around, if there are any?
Well, both Christopher Reeve and William Shatner were horse enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm.
In 1995, after Reeve's accident, Shatner was tapped to complete the narration for a horse riding safety video that Reeve had started.
Oh, that's awkward.
Oh,
God. Yikes.
But apparently they were friends from horse events.
Gotcha.
Christopher Reeve was in the 1995 Village of the Damned. He starred opposite of Kirstie Alley, who was in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
That's true. Yeah.
And then Christopher Reeve, of course, worked on Superman 3 across from Richard Pryor in 1983. Only a year before this episode was filmed, he and Pryor had a cameo appearance in the Muppet movie.
Aha.
Pryor was also in Brewster's Millions, along with Stephen Collins, who played Decker in Star Trek: The Original Motion Picture, and who was also accused of child molestation.
Yes. That is true.
Anytime he is the connection, I'm gonna bring it up.
We should. It shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah, every time. So I'm not gonna say he can't be a connection, because he's had a wide and varied career. It just has also coincidentally involved accusation of child molestation.
Wasn't he the dad on Seventh Heaven?
He was.
Yeah.
He was the dad on
Gross.
Seventh Heaven.
Oh, but these are basically the same episode. I mean, come on.
I mean, they basically, they both involve quick changes in form. Christopher Reeve ducking down in the phone booth and changing costumes, and Kirk being beamed back aboard the Enterprise to find himself all full size.
Oh, very true. Both episodes have little creatures causing havoc for the main cast. The rats on the Muppet Show and the little people on Star Trek.
Nice. Both involve a sudden change in plans. Christopher Reeve doing Shakespeare because Gonzo broke his nose, and the crew ditching their planetary scan to go check out a mysterious signal.
Well done. Both have an experiment that goes wrong, but then works out in the end. The little people on Terratin shoot their shrinking ray at the Enterprise, causing lots of trouble, but eventually it works out for them. And Honeydew's cow milker machine goes wrong at first, but then makes him find love with Beaker.
The best part is that's like a real machine now.
It's true. It really, one of his
few
inventions he made that actually turned out to be a real thing.
It's a real thing, I'm sure.
Exactly.
I
thought you had another one.
No.
Transporter malfunction.
What is that? What's
Transporter malfunction.
All right, so it's the part of the episode where we transport one character from one episode to the other and vice versa. What you got for us, Steve?
Muppets to Trek this week. I'm going to bring over the rats to replace the Lilliputians, shrinking everyone down to their size and demanding help.
I like it. The rats were fun. For Muppets of Star Trek, I'm having Sam the Eagle take the place of the Terratin leader because they're both equally grumpy and crotchety. I think it'll work really well.
Trek to Muppets, I'm going to bring over the entire tiny crew and have them work as a team to play the piano for Piggy's final number, jumping from key to key with all of their tiny might in coordination.
That's a lovely idea. That's a very Muppety sounding number, too. Star Trek to Muppets, I'm going to have Kirk take Christopher Reeve's place, which is funny because they're friends in real life, the actor, because it would be amazing to see Shatner do all the same skits that Reeves did in that show. That'd be just a lot of
quick
fun.
Changes in a phone booth and stuff. Absolutely.
And trying to do this talk singing, instead. It'd be a lot of fun. Brush up your Shakespeare. Start quoting him now. But that brings us to the end of episode 91 of the MuppeTrek Podcast.
Join us next time for the Muppet Show with special guest Linda Carter.
And the animated series episode, The Time Trap.
So, from the lovers, the dreamers, and us.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the MuppeTrek Podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter.
Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform.
This podcast has been brought to you by A Play on Nerds.